like the idea of a man who, I'm gonna say he's faithless, but who may have considered himself a god in his industry. And when we meet him, he's already been humbled and looking for a hit. And the idea that someone who tries to use God to his advantage. I mean, that's what was interesting. You know, he went from David to king, you know, or King David, and he was humbled, and everyone could see it but him. He is Brooklyn. He brings Brooklyn. He is New York City. He sees it in a way that I don't even necessarily see it. And I was born and raised here. I've been gone a long time. He's just one of a handful of visionary filmmakers that are unafraid, bold, brilliant. And that was the easiest decision I made with this whole project, is asking him to get involved. Spike is like, he yells and then he goes, all right, bet. And then it's like, all right, bet. That's just Spike, you know, because he's always going to go, all right, bet. That's just the way he expresses himself. And he was more excited than me. I was like, oh, okay. You know, it has been, because I'm just about done, fun getting back on the horse with him. Like I said, he's a visionary, great filmmaker, friend of the family as well. And it's interesting watching he with his children and, you know, our children kind of growing up together. Academy recognized what many of us have known for a long time. Jeffrey is a great actor, a thorough. I start moving like that because he's musical to me. He's a dancer. He's rhythmic. He's smooth and in the pocket and quiet and confident. So it's easy to hit the ball back over the net with him, you know, and unselfish, which is not to say rare for an actor, but he's an unselfish actor. You know, I'm prejudiced. There is only one city. So nice they named it twice. I'm proud to be from here. I hadn't been on the Brooklyn Bridge last time I was on the Brooklyn Bridge, outside the car, walking, was with Spike back in 1989. New York is beautiful, but it's changed, especially Brooklyn. I haven't spent, like I live up by the 59th Street, so we come down a lot of times on this side of the river, all the way down from 59th, and I'm going through Greenpoint and all that. And I never, you know how New York is very, not territorial, what's the word? Neighborhoods. You know, I'm from Mount Vernon. First of all, you never went to Brooklyn without numbers. Coming from Mount Vernon, we did not come to Brooklyn unless you had the right amount of people with you, because you may not get out of here. But that was then. What would you do with these circumstances? It's the morality tale for me. You know, the action beats, you know, he cut and paste that together as he goes, but it begs a very interesting question. And I'm ready now to see the original. I mean, I didn't want to kind of see it because I was like, oh, well, that's not really what we're making, and I didn't want to see something so good and then go, oh, shoot, I can't do that. I want to, you know, I didn't want to be affected by it negatively or intimidated by it.
Spike and I have been kind of threatening to work together for a long time, and he reached out to me and said that he was circling back to Denzel on this. They hadn't worked together in 15, 18 years. And he had a part that he wanted me to consider. And it was based on Akira Kurosawa's High and Low, which is an incredibly interesting, beautiful, dynamic film. And, you know, all of that made for a pretty good recipe. And so, yeah, I jumped on board. Also got to shoot largely in Brooklyn, which is very near my house. So, you know, it was just all, it just all came together and largely driven by Spike. You know, he's a genuine auteur. He's one of the great American filmmakers. uh, and he is very often a neighbor of mine. So yeah, just really, really pleased to finally get to work with him in earnest. You know, when I saw the Kurosawa, it was clear that that relationship was was built on a very specific caste dynamic where, you know, there was authority and there was submission. And I said, Spike, you sure you want me to play that part? But I think what we were able to do was kind of refashion that relationship between the two characters in a way that still allows, obviously, for a certain power dynamic, but at the same time allows for a more balanced relationship, and one that really is reflective more of contemporary American society, because that simply was not. So I was really pleased that we were able to find that, and then build a kind of backstory for the two of them, for Denzel's character and for my character, that they've grown up together. They've you know, run the streets together. One ascended, and one did not. That being my character, and so there's still some allegiance that's owed, but it's not owed out of anything arbitrary. It's owed because of the relationship that they had, and that favors that you know, one gifted the other, and so there's a wonderful, I think, complexity to it that we don't necessarily find in the Kurosawa. The Kurosawa is, I think, it's just so beautiful. I mean, that opening scene when they're in this gorgeous architectural setting, beautifully lit, black and white, and you have these crusty old men discussing women's shoes. It's just delicious. It's just so wonderful. But I think in order, again, to contemporize it and bring it, you know, straight into, you know, Spike Lee's New York City, the choice for David to be a record executive was one that allowed a lot of energy, you know, to be infused into the story, and brought you know, the opportunity for some great music to be a character within the film. And also, I think there's a really wonderful, logical backdrop for the relationship of this man who's become so successful to this, you know, young wannabe rapper who's on the outside. There's so many. The film is very much about class dynamics, and so there's so much opportunity, I think, within that space to play around with those dynamics, and you know, bring in some interesting characters into the mix as well, like ASAP Rocky, Rakim, who's a wonderful actor. I did a film with him called Monster a few years ago, and he's, you know, he's got something. You know, he has an ease about him. He has, you know, you know, kind of danger about him, that and a wonderful mystery about him that suits this role really, really nicely. I think the structure of the film is layered with all of those things that help drive the story forward. These class dynamics, class tensions, you know, this fraternal relationship between these two men that, in and of itself, is, you know, is bound up in some of these class tensions as well. All of these things, I think, combined to help heighten, you know, the drama within the film, but also help to give it a legitimacy. We understand the motivations of these characters. You know, we understand what their aspirations are. We understand from, you know, the young felon's perspective, why he feels on the outside of this world, this kingdom, if you will, that David has created. It's just a wonderful allegory to allow for really, uh, a morality tale to be told within. It's great stuff. And again, at the same time, it's modern New York City as seen through Spike Lee's lens. It's pretty cool. Spike said to me one day, uh, before we started filming, we were meeting, we were working on the script, talking things through. He said, "Oh, Elijah's reading with Denzel on Monday." I'm like, "Really? Okay." I had no idea. Elijah had been working on some other projects, auditioning here and there, and the casting director, Kim Coleman, was working on one of those projects and working with Spike to cast this film. And so I guess she showed Spike some tape, and Spike said, "Sure." He went in and read with Denzel, and Denzel called me after, apologetic and, kind of feign disappointment, trying to convince me that Elijah had not gotten the part. He made the one mistake, however, of calling me from Elijah's phone. So I figured he would not be calling me from Elijah's phone if there weren't good news. And as it turns out, there was good news. And I beyond that, I'm so pleased to have had an opportunity to work with him on this, his first film. But what I'm more pleased about is how wonderfully he did. Uh, I think he does some really beautiful stuff in this film, and that's really the bottom line. And the fact that some of that happened, with us working together. Yeah, it's just a lovely gift. I'm really thankful that that Spike gave him and gave us that opportunity. The most valuable thing in working on film and within the collaboration, no matter who you're working with, is trust. And what I witnessed and experienced with them is trust built over many years. They appreciate one another as creative partners. They've been in the trenches before. They've come out the other side wildly successfully. Made some iconic films, told some iconic stories, and back together again after many years. And all of that history was reflected in their relationship on set. Pretty cool to see. And pretty rare. I took inspiration for this character from certain hip-hop personas, because as Spike and I were talking about Paul's background, him having been incarcerated, come out, trying to, rebuild his life, learning lessons inside that, have helped him to, rehabilitate himself. And we struck on this idea of, him being a 5%er, which is this, this really interesting sect, really, born of that environment, born of the prisons and the desires of men like Paul to find meaning and find purpose and rehabilitate themselves through a kind of spiritual awakening. And there's an expression of 5%er ideas in a lot of early hip hop. You hear a lot of these almost subliminal messaging that is included in a lot of that stuff. So I think Paul, too, is probably a fan of the earlier stuff. And it's fascinating to me. I'm fascinated by this phenomenon that a lot of black men undergo in America, whereby the forced pressure, unfortunate pressure of incarceration causes a type of metamorphosis to occur. And there are any number of tools that men might find themselves using during that time, largely education, reading. I'm fascinated by this. I'm curious as to why it has to happen within that cauldron as opposed to on the outside. But there are many reasons for that. But these were considerations that we made, as we gave thought to who this character was, that he had gone through this process while inside to try to reclaim himself. And it was through the ideas of the 5%er that were related in some ways to these Islamic ideas, and bound up with kind of other conjurings, if you would. But inside of that, he found meaning. And that relates to in some ways the early origins of hip hop.
A lot of Pam and the family dynamic really came to us. We had a week before we started filming for rehearsals, and we got a lot of work done there, and it's something you don't always have, but rehearsal and the process is really important to Spike, and as an actor, it's kind of a dream to have that amount of time to find the dynamic, especially in a family. And it became very clear early on that Denzel's character, David King, was the protector of the family, right? The protector of the family unit. But in that, and really, I guess when we got to set, in some of the scenes where you see the intimacy between mother and son, it became really, really apparent that Pam was the protector of Trey, the real protector, in terms of being a more maybe sensitive parent, the one maybe that Trey felt comfortable coming to speak to about things that he didn't feel comfortable speaking to his father, David King, who is a larger than life figure, and maybe not always approachable even as a father, because of the man that he is. So there was that dynamic, but also it was important to me to make Pam not just a mother, but a friend to Trey. And I know a lot of people have feelings about parenting and whether or not parents should be friends with their kids. I grew up in a family where my mother was my absolute best friend, and that's how I wanted Pam to treat Trey, and so I tried to create that dynamic. Spike, what do I know, because I wasn't there for his first day on his first set, but he is no less enthusiastic or excited about the work than when I met him 15 years ago. He approaches it with such passion and such gratitude. He's clearly a man who still loves what he does, and is grateful to be doing what he loves. And he comes in every day like a coach. We all have cast chairs. Mine says Pam King. Denzel says King, which is appropriate, right? And Spike says coach on it, because he comes in with the plays for the day. He's ready to go, but he's also completely willing and able to change it up and improvise if need be, for the sake of collaboration. And it's really awesome to witness. I've asked myself, I don't have children of my own, but and this will make this story funny, but it's not actually a funny story. Early on, it was the day of my audition, I was thinking to myself, if I had a child, right, and this child went missing or was abducted, the unthinkable, right, and they were in the care of my partner, would you go there? Would you place blame? Would you recognize that it was as hard for them as it was for you? How, you would hope that you could come together over this tragedy and work it out, right? But who knows? And you hope to never find that answer. But I think it was really important to show that these two parents don't turn on one another under the circumstances. You know, it would be easy to do, I think. But the unfunny story that I was going to tell was the morning of this audition, my partner, who always rides our puppy to work on his back, called me frantically while I was getting myself into hair and makeup to come to 40 Acres and told me that our dog had jumped out of his backpack and run across the West Side Highway and was missing in Riverside Park. So here I am getting beautiful while this, 4-week-old puppy is missing. And it would have been so easy to say, like, how could you do this? But he was like beside himself, crying on the phone. So I went out and I went to look for her, and we couldn't find her. And I said, I have to leave for this audition. So I go to the audition and I get the phone call after I'm out that we found the dog. But it was like, do I now use this in my audition, or is that sick, right? Because it's like, it's perfect timing for the worst thing to happen. Yeah. I'm auditioning a scene where my child has been abducted and now my dog is gone. What I will say about Spike and Denzel's relationship that makes them really unique is that both Spike and Denzel are at the absolute top of their game, right? And they have been for decades and decades. They're creative geniuses. So how do you have these two men who are both such legends in their field, but who don't always share the same vision, because no one does, right? How do you get two giants like that to collaborate and compromise in a healthy way on a set? And I think that's where the Five project many decades later comes in. They've got this trust between them that even if the vision isn't the same, each one will be protected. And I think that's the real only way to collaborate as artists, on a set, is to have that trust. And I'm sure it was there, in some capacity on the first project they'd ever done together, but it was really apparent in this one. Well, I think, it's such a compelling story because the audience is watching, and it's impossible not to put yourself in the shoes of these characters. What would I do? What would I hope I would do? But it comes to this. So growing up, my parents had this print, a Norman Rockwell print, that I stole a few years ago from my own place. And under the artwork was the text, "Do unto others what you would have them do unto you," right? The golden rule. And that's really what this story is about. You are in his shoes, right? Paul, what would you want someone else to do for you? David King, if your son Trey had been abducted, what would you want someone else to do for you? And I think if you approach things that way, the answer is not always easy, but it's clear. Spike keeps it real, He's up in the Bronx, hanging with the Puerto Ricans, not a real Puerto Rican Day parade, but celebrating their culture in their neighborhood. He's in Brooklyn, you talk about warts and all, like all the beauty of real, like historic Brooklyn the way it used to be, and gentrified Brooklyn now. He's not trying to glamorize or show New York in a light that it isn't, and that's, I think, how any real New Yorker rolls. The beautiful thing about Denzel's ability to just freestyle, and because he is a music mogul in this, a lot of his text and dialogue has been freestyling. Like he's rapping in some of these scenes, and his brain works so fast, it's incredible. He could have had a career as a rapper, honestly. But because he does that, I have the freedom to then do a little bit of that too, right? So you have to keep the shape of the scene, obviously, right? But I'm really a stickler for the words and the words that are on the page. I think it's, a duty to the writer who's much smarter than I am, who maybe doesn't know the character, but is better than I do, but is the gatekeeper of the entire picture. But when you have someone like Denzel, who is playful and is playing around with the words, you have no other choice than to go along and have some fun with it. So that's been a really good time. Like our scene on the Brooklyn Bridge, all of that dialogue was sorry guys, was kind of scrapped in the moment, and we just, you're dancing on the Brooklyn Bridge with some background walking by, but also like, tourists from every corner of the earth walking by and snapping photos and not believing what's before them, and you just have to go with the flow. That was my last day of filming, so to end it like that was kind of like, doesn't get any better.
I had seen the samurai films as a kid, but I was just going to the movie theater. So Rashomon, that's when I really became aware of the master Akira Kurosawa. And the premise for Rashomon I used for She's Gotta Have It, my first film. And as you see, my office is like a museum. And one of my prize items, whatever you want to call it, is a portrait of Kurosawa that he signed to me with the paintbrush. So I've always been a fan, and when this project came to me, I was in. This film is about morals, scruples. It's a moral dilemma. And we got to give credit to Ed McBain, who wrote the novel. The novel was first, then Kurosawa adapted it. And what's great about this is that I know the audience members, the people who see this film, are gonna ask themselves this question: what would they do if they were in a spot like Denzel is? His character is, and David King, his character is in this film. It's a moral dilemma. What will you do to save a young man who's not your son? I'm a connoisseur of music. Music is a staple of Spike Lee joint. I work with Michael Jackson, Prince, Aretha Franklin, Miles Davis. And you want me to go on? Public Enemy. So I know music, and I know how to use music in my films. We're doing our thing, and it was the right time for us to get back together. I mean, as I said before, sir, Denzel and I did not know it had been that many years. For us, it was like yesterday. We didn't miss a step. There was no time spent about what we have to do or we have to regain what we had 20 years ago. That did not happen. It wasn't even a thought. As I said before, we didn't even know it was that length of time that had passed. For us, it was like yesterday. Number one, I give love to the cast and director, Kim Coleman, who's cast many of the Spike Lee joints. And when you're a director, you're like the general manager of a team. You gotta put, you gotta put your team together. And I've always had strong ensemble groups, and Denzel wants the best people that he's playing with, that he's surrounded with. Jeffrey Wright's one of the greats. And that pairing of Jeffrey and Dee, and then also, this is not the first film A$AP Rocky has been in, so he's not just a rapper, he's an actor. I mean, he has goods, he has a discipline, he understands, A$AP understands story, he's funny. A lot of those scenes, Denzel was, the thing where he's doing Nas's lyrics at the end, that's not in the script. He surprised me. He pulled one up. He did his research and got songs from Illmatic. And Rocky, of course, knew it was. So they were going back and forth, toe to toe. It's a great, great scene. I'm gonna stop saying that this is our last film. I've been saying that. I'm not saying that no more. Because the only reason I was saying that because Denzel was doing interviews saying he's retiring. And every time I pick up a trade paper, he's doing other movies. I'm not saying. So there is still a chance. I mean, how old will we be? What happens to another 20-year break? I know. Realize I'm behind the camera like this. And he'd be better shape than me, so. So I'm not saying anymore that this is the finale.